In the black powder era, there was a search for more firepower. You could get it with multiple barrels, or maybe a revolver cylinder, or you could put multiple loads in the same barrel.
Throughout the history of firearms design, one of the goals of firearms designers has been multiple shots with minimal disruption to the shooter. And you see this going back centuries. Now, of course, the earliest concept was either multiple firearms or multiple barrels. This is why pistols were sold in pairs or braces. This is why you have double-barrel shotguns, double-barrel rifles, or more barrels. But after a certain point, multiple barrels, multiple locks becomes very heavy and cumbersome. And the idea emerged very early of stacking multiple loads in the same barrel.
With these guns, you load one round, and then you load a round on top of that, then you load a round on top of that, then you load a round on top of that. And then you work a lock backwards from the front to the rear, hoping that none of the fire from the exploding front charge is going to get around the ball on the round behind it to let off that charge. At least that's the theory.
To me, one of the most interesting guns in the NRA museums right now, if not the most interesting gun, is a superposed wheel lock that dates from the late 16th century. This is a 16th century 16 shooter. We believe it was made about 1585 in Germany. It fires 16 rounds. It has 2 wheel locks and a match lock. Now, the way this gun works, it can be fired several ways. It can be fired with one trigger pull, firing all 16 rounds one after the other, starting with the first round and working the way down the barrel. It can be fired as 9 rounds fired in that manner, and then with the second lock, the rear lock being fired, 7 shots being fired in that manner. And it's set up not only with 2 wheel locks, but also with a match lock at the very rear to where you can fire 9 shots, then 6 shots, and still have a round held in reserve.
These superposed load guns fall kind of into that firearms curiosa category. I don't know anyone who regularly shoots them, and that's because the premise behind them, I think, is bad. When you have an obstruction in a bore, typically that's a bad thing. You get excessive pressure. The trick with these superposed guns is to make sure that the top load fires first. If they don't, you end up with excessive pressure, and very well could be a very dangerous situation.
The concept of superposed charges continued well into the 19th century. One example is the Lindner. Now, these were made both in pistols and also in rifle form. The rifle was adopted by the U.S. military. The Lindner system has 2 charges loaded one on top of each other, powder ball, and then it has 2 percussion caps. And if the gun works properly, the right percussion cap is fired with the first pull of the trigger. The powder commutes down a tube inside the barrel and ignites the front charge. The second charge is fired when the second hammer is dropped with the second pull of the trigger and fires from the rear position in the barrel. Now, this gun could be fired by 2 successive pulls of the trigger, or it could be fired in very quick succession by a firm pull all the way through, a single pull of the trigger.
We don't know who made this particular superimposed charge percussion rifle up. It follows the lines of a American long rifle, perhaps one made in Pennsylvania, very nicely. What's unique about it, though, is in the lock mechanism. When you look at this particular gun, you can see it has the capability for firing a forward charge and the rear charge. This particular gun has 2 triggers because what you're going to do, pull back the hammer all the way, pull the trigger, and this striker allows the forward percussion cone to be hit. Pulling that trigger allows this to swivel out of the way. You cock the hammer once more, and then you hit the rear percussion charge. If you were a hunter, having a gun that fired more than 1 shot in the 1840s, that was one heck of an advantage.
In 1860, a gentleman named Walsh came up with an idea. If a 5 or 6 shot revolver with 5 or 6 chambers is good, wouldn't it be twice as good to make that same gun shoot 10 or 12 charges? He came up with revolver designs where each chamber held 2 charges, again, one stacked on top of the other. This is the small caliber 5-chamber 10-shot model. One pull of the trigger fires the right hammer first, and then a second pull fires the left hammer. Or it can be pulled all the way through with a single pull to fire first the right and then the second hammer.
With these superposed loads, you're hoping that they're not all going to go off at once, which will create a catastrophic failure of the gun, because their metallurgy back then wasn't anywhere near what it is today, and could, you know, not only injure the shooter but everybody near the guy. You know, as Mark Twain once wrote about a pepper box, he thought there wasn't anywhere on any point on the compass that was safe to stand behind that gun. And I imagine one of those superposed guns are going to be quite similar.